In the previous chapter, we saw that before Vikir regressed, doors connecting the world of demons and the world of humans appeared and brought with them the 10 elite corpses. In the fight against demons, the only one who managed to survive was Vikir, purely at the whim of the demons. Vikir began to get angry when he saw the corpses of children, and Andromalius revealed to him that the children were still alive inside his stomach. Vikir exploded with rage and cut off the remaining hand he had, but to his surprise, the demon Andromalius used regeneration, causing both hands to grow back. The fight between Vikir and Andromalius began. He thought he was going to win thanks to being able to use the 6th technique of the Baskerville, but to his surprise, Vikir not only could use the 6th technique of the Baskerville, but also the 7th technique, a technique that only the head of the family was allowed to use. Vikir stabbed Andromalius with the Beelzebub sword and revealed that he knew about the plan of the 10 elite corpses to connect the human world and demon world. He also revealed that he planned on killing them one by one. Andromalius began to feel fear and showed his true demon form, transforming the fingers of his hands into snakes and attacked Vikir. He was able to annihilate many of the snakes, but in the process one of them bit him on the shoulder. Andromalius started using the infinite blood absorption technique and began extracting Vikir's blood through the fang's wound. Andromalius' ability allowed him to control blood, making his skills absolutely invincible when facing living beings. Before starting with the next chapter, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any new videos of this wonderful series. The demon Andromalius reached out his hand towards Vikir, and slowly the demon's mouth began to extract blood from Vikir through the snake fang's wound. While he was extracting blood from Vikir, he started staring into his eyes and with a smile revealed that he had the power to suck blood infinitely. He also added that the power he possessed was the power of immortality. He also added that as long as there were injured living beings around him, his vitality would be infinite. Vikir simply looked the demon in the eyes and didn't say a single word. Then he slightly turned his head to the side and began staring as his blood started shooting out from his shoulder through the snake's fang wound. At first, he remained silent, but several seconds later, he smiled. Seeing Vikir smiling, Andromalius asked if he had lost composure. He thought that he was mocking him, so he moved his hand even closer to him and started extracting the blood at an even faster speed. With a penetrating gaze, Vikir looked into his eyes, and while his body emitted a murderous aura, he covered his mouth with his hand. At that moment, Andromalius felt immense pressure, and Vikir revealed to him that it was amusing to see him enjoy something he didn't even know he was absorbing. Vikir's blood slowly began to take effect in Andromalius' body, causing him to gradually poison himself. He looked at Vikir with eyes of surprise and confusion as he didn't know what was happening. In a matter of seconds, he fell to his knees, placed both hands on the ground, bowed his head, and while agonizing due to intense pain, he asked Vikir if his blood was not the blood of an ordinary person. Vikir activated the Beelzebub sword, slightly turned his head towards the sword, and while staring at the blade intently, smiled and asked Andromalius if he wanted to see something amusing. He brought the Beelzebub sword closer to his other hand and using the sharp blade made a deep cut on his wrist, causing his blood to slowly trickle down like a waterfall onto the ground. While Andromalius was writhing in pain, he heard the sound of Vikir's blood. He slightly raised his head, and upon seeing that Vikir's blood was emitting a demonic aura, he quickly realized that the blood in Vikir's body was not ordinary blood but poisonous blood. Seeing Andromalius' expression, Vikir revealed to him that he not only possessed toxic blood. In a matter of seconds, the wound he had made on his wrist using the Beelzebub sword completely healed. He began to stare into Andromalius' eyes and with a smile, revealed to him that like demons, he could also use regeneration. Upon hearing this, Andromalius' expression drastically changed as he stared fixedly at the wound on Vikir's wrist. He began to sweat and wonder how it was possible for a mere human to possess the ability of regeneration. He also started to question how Vikir's blood could harm demons. Only the mountain spider, the 9-headed serpent that lived in the land of giants, and the great Medusa beneath the Black Sea possessed this terrible venom. Gradually, drops of Vikir's toxic blood began to fall onto Andromalius' face. He clenched his teeth tightly, and while looking into his eyes, he began to wonder how it was possible that the blood of a mere human could contain a poison on par with the most powerful monsters. Vikir made a small cut on his finger using the Beelzebub sword, then extended his finger towards Andromalius, causing the blood to slowly drip onto his face. Within seconds, the toxic blood started taking effect, causing the demon to experience intense pain. Andromalius placed his head on the ground, and while covering his face, he began to scream due to the intense pain caused by Vikir's toxic blood. He simply stared at him fixedly, and upon seeing how he was writhing in pain, he couldn't help but smile. He mocked Andromalius and asked if he wanted some more blood. Vikir possessed the gluttonous fly known as Beelzebub. In the first slot he had equipped Madam's deadly poison ability of S rank. In the second slot, he had equipped the Silent Hill Mushu Hushu ability, which was rank A+, and in the third slot, he had equipped the Super Regeneration ability Swamp Salamander of Wolf, which was rank A+. He put his finger in his mouth to stop the bleeding. Then he stared at Andromalius, who was writhing in pain on the floor, and thought that, as expected, Madam's poison was even effective against the 10 elite corpses. Vikir unsheathed the Beelzebub sword, and while the blade was emitting a strong aura, he thought that he wouldn't be able to kill Andromalius using only Madam poison. Slowly, he began to advance towards Andromalius, and thought that now he had confirmed that the poison was effective. He was a high-ranking graduate in 6th Baskerville, and now that he possessed the power of Beelzebub, he thought he would be able to defeat the 10 elite corpses of this era. Vikir unsheathed the Beelzebub sword, activated Baskerville's 7th technique, and attacked Andromalius in the chest, causing a deep cut. After receiving the attack, Andromalius fell to the ground, and while writhing in pain, he stared fixedly at Vikir, who was approaching him. He clenched his teeth tightly and began to wonder why Vikir's strength was incomprehensible for a demon like him. Several seconds later, Vikir approached Andromalius, and as his body emitted an intense and murderous aura, he stared directly into his eyes. Andromalius began to wonder how on earth a monster like Vikir had been created. He decided not to dwell on the matter any longer and concluded that for now, the most important thing was to stay alive and let the demons know of his existence. He deactivated the shield that was protecting the cave, and it didn't take long for Vikir to notice. He slightly turned his head towards the cave's exit and realized that the demon had gathered more magical power. While he was distracted, Andromalius slowly started standing up while his body was emanating a demonic aura. With a demonic smile, he decided to turn the water into blood. He used his demonic power, and slowly, the water from the river that flowed through the cave began to float and gather behind Vikir. As the water slowly gathered behind him, he simply put his hand in his pants pocket and watched without saying a word. Gradually, the water started transforming into blood. Realizing this, Vikir slightly turned his head back, and while watching as the water was turning into blood, he thought that Andromalius even had the power to turn water into blood. He also thought that despite not being able to use all his power now, a high-ranking demon was still a high-ranking demon after all. Using the Beelzebub sword, Vikir cut his wrist and then extended his hand towards the river, causing the toxic blood to slowly drip into the water. He stared into Andromalius' eyes and told him that now that he had poured his toxic blood into the river, he wouldn't be able to absorb the water. While Andromalius was standing up and his body was emitting a demonic aura, he looked down at the ground and responded to him that if he was trying to prevent him from being able to absorb the blood by spraying his own toxic blood into the river, it was useless. While the drops of blood that Andromalius was controlling with his power were floating around them, he revealed to Vikir that turning water into blood served no purpose such as absorbing the blood. Upon hearing this, Vikir became cautious and simply remained silent without uttering a single word. Andromalius put a hand on his face and, while staring fixedly at the ground, gave the order to the Blood Knights to stand up. At that moment, the drops of blood that were floating around and in a gaseous state transformed into liquid state and began to fall towards the ground. Once the drops of blood impacted against the ground, they transformed into Blood Knights. In a matter of seconds, many Blood Knights appeared and surrounded Vikir. He simply stood still and made no movement. Andromalius stood up, and while covering the wound on his face with his hand, he stared into Vikir's eyes and revealed to him that these Blood Knights could use the 6th technique of the Baskervilles, which he himself had learned. He also added that even if he could use the 7th technique, he would not be able to go against all the Blood Knights who could use the 6th technique. With a fierce look, Andromalius stared into Vikir's eyes, and while his eyes reflected the anger he felt at this moment, he revealed to him that he was going to kill him and then kill everyone he loved one by one so that he would regret going against the 10 elite corpses. The Blood Knights adopted offensive poses and slowly began to approach Vikir. He simply looked at the Blood Knights, put his hand in his pants pocket, and didn't say a single word. He started taking his hand out of his pocket and asked Andromalius if these blood clots could really use all the Baskerville 6 technique. He thought this was going to be dangerous since he hadn't prepared for this situation at all. A few days ago, when Hugo had offered Vikir anything he wanted as a reward, he had chosen something specific. He took out a whistle from his pocket, and while holding it in his hand, he started staring at it intently. Then he showed the whistle to Andromalius and, remembering that he had lived in Baskerville, asked if he knew about this whistle. Upon seeing the whistle, Andromalius began to get nervous and quickly took several steps back as he knew what the function of that whistle was. He opened his eyes, and upon thinking about what Vikir had planned to do, he started sweating. Vikir simply put the whistle in his mouth and, while staring at him with a murderous look in his eyes, smiled. He took a deep breath and, using all his strength, blew into the whistle. Within seconds, the sound wave began to travel through the cave until several seconds later it exited the cave and reached the forest. Upon hearing the sound of the whistle, a man with long hair appeared and began to stare fixedly at the mountain of Andromalius' cave. The man placed both hands on his sword and slowly began to unsheath it. At the same time, inside the cave, Andromalius pointed his finger at Vikir and ordered the Blood Knights to quickly finish him off, knowing that something bad was about to happen now that he had used that whistle. The Blood Knights followed Andromalius' order and slowly began to advance towards Vikir. Vikir didn't even attempt to defend himself from the attack of the Blood Knights. He stared directly into Andromalius' eyes and revealed that the whistle had the power to use Baskerville's commands. The Blood Knights gained momentum and gradually started advancing quickly towards Vikir, who simply stood still and revealed to Andromalius that the black whistle had another function. While all the Blood Knights were advancing quickly towards Vikir, the silhouette of a cut appeared on the cave wall. He stared into Andromalius' eyes and revealed to him that the other function of the whistle was to allow him to use Baskerville's full force. At that moment, someone unleashed a powerful cut against the mountain where Andromalius' cave was located. This cut was so strong that it even split the mountain in half. Because the mountain had been split in half, a strong wind entered inside the cave, causing debris to start flying. Andromalius covered his face with both hands, and while staring intently at Vikir, he began to wonder what was happening. At that moment, the Baskerville hounds appeared and started unsheathing their swords. All the hounds used their swords and quickly entered the cave. Andromalius looked up and was left speechless as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Due to the powerful attack, half of the mountain had disappeared as if it had never existed. Someone wearing boots appeared on top of the cave and began to wonder why Vikir had asked him to borrow the power to control all Baskerville. This person was none other than Hugo Le Baskerville. He hadn't come alone, but Osiris Le Baskerville and Boston Terrier Le Baskerville had also come with him. Hugo placed both hands behind his back, and while staring intently at Vikir, he thought that the reason why he had asked him to borrow the power to control all Baskerville was to hunt a demon. He began to stare at Andromalius with a murderous look and told everyone that he expected nothing less from his son. Upon hearing these words, Vikir felt honored. He placed a hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and slightly bowed his head to thank his father for the kind words. Andromalius stepped back several meters from him, and while looking into his eyes, he was in shock. He looked up, and upon seeing Hugo Le Baskerville, the commanders, and the Vice Patriarch Osiris, he began to tremble with fear as he didn't know how he was going to face all these monsters. In front of him, all the Baskerville hounds appeared, and upon seeing this, he started wondering why they were all here. Hugo extended his hand to one side and caught everyone's attention. For the next 6 hours, he hereby declared that Vikir van Baskerville, the possessor of the whistle, had full control over their entire force. Vikir simply lowered his head slightly and closed his eyes, then he lifted it up, and while staring at Andromalius with a murderous look, he ordered all the Baskerville hounds to tear the demon into pieces. At that moment, one of the Baskerville hounds appeared behind the demon Andromalius and stabbed him in the chest. Upon hearing Vikir's order, all the Baskerville hounds gained momentum and began thrusting their swords into Andromalius' body, who started writhing in pain. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.